I just arrived. I'm a little bit tired. I wasn't feeling very well these past few days, so forgive me if I'm a bit shaky. My bit today starts, unsurprisingly for me, on Facebook. It's no secret that the excessive frustration, anticipation, anxiety, and confusion of the current political moment in Egypt has made thinking effectively hard for some, struggling to produce and sustain interesting thought. Facebook is a space where this frustration and anxiety can be released and expressed, but it is also a haven for escapism from the difficult tasks of structured, potent thought and artistic creation. A couple of weeks ago, I found myself participating in a discussion related to the posting on Facebook of a YouTube video where the now unsuccessful presidential candidate, Hamdin Sabbahi, is interviewed in 2005 about the Iraq War. Sabbahi is a politician who has been described as a neo-Nasserist. What neo-Nasserism is and how it should be defined within the current political framework is a matter for a different paper or speaker to pursue. But for this paper, I'm taking the discussion the video helped initiate as a starting point to think about Nasserism and its consequences on the pre- and post-1967 intellectual and artistic fields. The video is titled in Arabic, Hamdin Sabbahi and his defense of the Al-Qaeda organization. You won't believe it, share. In the video, we witness Sabbahi react in a rather charged manner and declare that, quote, any gun pointed towards US Marines in Iraq is good, even if it's an Al-Qaeda gun. And the Al-Qaeda presence in Iraq as a form of resistance is a positive phenomenon that should be supported. The overreaction to these statements helped me in putting my finger on something I would like to explore further, but for now have some preliminary ideas on that I would like to quickly sketch out in this talk. As a response to one of these surprised and appalled comments, I wrote, quote, I disagree with him completely, but this is the default Nasserist position regarding foreign intervention. Sovereignty is probably the most important thing to a Nasserist. One must admit there is a subtlety to that position that cannot be captured on tape, and that it's not that spectacular when you realize the framework. And obviously this video does not provide a political historical framework where you can do that. Having said that, it is clear that this logic is a form of corruption. All the candidates except one are corrupted through history, the historical struggles of their political positions within the corrupt system of world politics has to corrupt them one way or another. Unquote. There is nothing particularly special about this statement, but for me, one term stands out, revealing itself as probably the term that most holds the key to unlocking many complexities in Egyptian art practice from the 60s through to our current moment. That term is sovereignty. In 1964, Anwar Abdel Malik, a theorist with Marxist leanings, described the then recently coined term Nasserism, stating, Nasserism, the word itself an Egyptian prototype of national development, was unknown until recently. It has come to mean that mixture of radical independence, the reconquest of national identity, and the emphasis on social progress, which is usually described as nationalism, but which it may but which it may be more accurate to characterize as nationalitarian, or the nationalitarian stage of development, to indicate the period during which the peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America are freeing themselves from imperialism and neo-imperialism, recovering and building up their own national identities in the world context of the Cold War. Now, this appears to be the standard definition of Nasserism. I'm not sure that in this platform I need to elaborate too much how this so-called radical independence was achieved. The elements of chance or of world political dynamics that contributed to its rhetoric and why it was seen to be important for the regime of the free officers. But what concerns me here is the question of sovereignty and its use by the regime as the main currency in the construction of a superstructure of public being and public imagination. In Jacques Derrida's last seminars from 2001 to 2003, which were published later in 2 volumes under the title of The Beast and the Sovereign, Derrida starts with a definition of the sovereign borrowed from the structural linguist Emile Benveniste. Quote, "The sovereign, in the broadest sense of the term, is he who has the right and strength to be and be recognized as himself, the same, properly the same as himself. But the social political manufacturing of sovereignty is a matter of measures, of weights, and to a degree it is a matter of calculated distances. This is all embedded in a phrase that Derrida often uses in his seminars, the phrase, quote, the sovereign like a god, like a beast. Using this phrase, Derrida argues that throughout history, the social political space of sovereignty has been positioned in between 2 figures. God, a figure of absolute sovereignty above the law, and the beast or the animal, a figure below the law, without recourse to sovereign power or right. The relation between the beast and the sovereign thus rests on the operation of the sovereign power as a relation of force. In these seminars, Derrida also appears fascinated by the work of the 17th century British thinker Thomas Hobbes, particularly his most prominent work of political theory, The Leviathan, in which Hobbes sets out his doctrine of the foundation of states and legitimate governments, and thus originating social contract theory. In one remarkably striking passage, Derrida rearticulates a metaphorical explanation developed by Hobbes to explain how sovereignty functions within a society. The passage reads, "This sovereignty is like an iron lung, an artificial respiration, an artificial soul. So the state is a sort of robot, an animal monster, is stronger, etc., than natural man, like a gigantic prothesis designed to amplify the power of the living man, that it protects, that it serves, but like a dead machine, or even a machine of death, a machine which is only the master of the living. Like a machine of death can serve the living, but this state and prosthetic machine must also extend, mine, imitate, and even reproduce down to the details the living creature that produces it." Generally speaking, the 1952 revolution can be said to have three stages: 1952 to 1954, a period of indecisiveness, which could have gone either way, democracy or military rule, ending with the latter, after the house arrest of General Muhammad Ligi. 1954 to 1961, the battle for sovereignty as a state on the international stage, the extensive restructuring of the bureaucratic infrastructure, nationalization of key resources, and the rise of the new military elite as the new ruling class, escalation of the battle against leftist political forces and the Muslim Brotherhood. 1961 to 1967, the strong socialist turn after the failure of the United Arab Republic, the creation of a single-party hegemonic system in the form of the Arab Socialist Union, the new national charter fomenting the intended social character of the state, the slow but sure rise of the reactionary right wing within the ranks of the military ruling camp, the 1967 defeat. For artists and the intelligentsia, 1967 does not seem to be the year when suddenly a realization of the non-inclusiveness and autocratic nature of the regime strikes deep resentment or doubt, hindering artists' ability to position themselves within the inscribed conditions. In an article for the New Left Review, he wrote a few months after the Six-Day War, Anwar Abdul Malik describes the main rule that shaped the regime's discourse regarding any political actor from outside the military ranks. The rule being, collaborate with them, absorb them, but at all costs, keep every decision-making power in your own hands. In other words, the quest for sovereignty had by the early 60s turned into the artificial synthesis of sovereignty by blocking out any elements seen as a threat to the original dream of a radically independent state. Not by naive censorship, but by the application of the above unspoken rule. The unfortunate thing for Nasser was that the threat to the sovereignty he was trying to build and sustain through complete military hegemony came from within and not from without his ranks. Naguib Mahfouz predicts this turn of affairs in his 1967 novel, Miramar, portrayed in a short conversation between two of the novel's characters. One of them claims that the country only has two alternatives to Nasser's regime, the communists or the Muslim Brotherhood. The other character disagrees and states that there is a third alternative, America. What? America will rule us? How? Through a moderate rightist group, the answer comes back. So to a certain extent, the National Charter was the beginning of the end of Nasser's dreams of sovereignty. And the point at which sovereignty of the state began to turn into Derrida's Hobbes-inspired description of sovereignty as an iron-lung, gigantic processus designed to amplify the power of the living, a dead machine, or even a machine of death, a machine which is only the mask of the living. What consecutive generations of Egyptians experienced after 1967 was exactly this dead machine, whose fuel continued to be sovereignty, and the fear of non-independence, despite there being little of it in the first place. I would argue that artists and writers were among the earliest to realize this predicament of inflated sovereignty, being the very raison d'être of the regime's continuing existence. Abdelhadi al-Ghazar, for example, is almost always referred to as an artist promoting state ideology. This excerpt describing his famous painting, Al-Mithaq, is the charter written by Carolyn Williams, can be taken as an example. In 1962, Abdelhadi Ghazal won first prize in the competition, The Revolution 10 years after. With his Al-Mithaq, the Charter, it is a painting that brilliantly captures the new Egypt and its inclusive political aims. Egypt, her skin, the green color of the resurrected Osiris, and crowned with the emblem of the Republic, stands in the center, like a pharaonic tree goddess, holding in her hand the charter of the revolution. The farmer and the worker kneel before her, while behind her the priest and the imam embrace. You can see them in the background. The worker holds a wrench, and around him are machine parts, symbols of Egypt's industrialized future. The fallah, or the farmer, looks down at the cotton blossom and the mounds of seeds in his hands. Next to him lies a paper headlined "Ownership of the Earth." But can we not read this painting using Hobbesian, Derridian notions of sovereignty as the main anchor of meaning? Cannot Lady Egypt be a body overtaken by the sovereignty machine? Does she not stand so inanimate that she could indeed be that iron lung, that gigantic prosthesis designed to amplify the power of the living, a dead machine, or even a machine of death, a machine which is only the mask of the living? So inanimate is this machine that she does not notice the citizens at her feet, but instead, fully immersed in her own sovereignty, looks into a void holding the charter and signaling an almost mechanical vow. Does not the worker look like he is pleading the machine to communicate with him? Does not the farmer look down mournfully to his seedlings in hand? Could not the priest and the imam in the background landscape actually be finding consolidation in each other instead of celebrating unity? Who holds the real ownership of the land headlined on the paper? But what has brought Lady Egypt to this condition? Again, Anwar Abdul Malik has an explanation. In his late 1967 paper, he states, "The kernel of the crisis which affects the Egyptian national revolution and inhibits its development may now be formulated into two propositions. One, it is impossible to build a modern state in the absence of a political class, in the Gramscian sense of the term. Yet this is precisely what the military regime has been concerned to eliminate since 1952. Two, it's impossible to initiate a socialist revolution and to build a popular state in the absence of socialists without the mobilization of the popular masses, rural and urban, and the revolutionary intelligentsia, certainly not by relying on a political apparatus committed to a fight against the left, and by that fact open to all forms of penetration. To put it another way, Lady Egypt is above the law, like a god, while the farmer, the workman, the imam, and the priest are all below the law, like a beast." After those fateful 18 days that started on January 25th, 2011, came to an end, Cairo and Alexandria were suddenly infested with billboards, small and large, featuring the Egyptian flag and the short phrase, "Masr fouq il-Jamia," or Egypt is above everyone, or above all. What or who is Egypt in this phrase? Of course, here Egypt does not mean the state of Egypt, including its own citizens, but the state of Egypt without them. For the state has become so mechanical that its sovereignty is seen as something reproducible without citizens. the citizens become beasts below the law. Perhaps this realization is why artist Salah Abdul Karim produced his famous series of scrap metal animals. Starting in the early 60s, the canine, the cockroach, and the crocodile, made from the refuse of the military regime's industrialization program, have turned into steely iron masks too, in a reflection of their relationship towards the almighty sovereign state. They too seem to be looking for radical independence. It is well known that Nasser admired Voltaire, so much so that while a student, he wrote and published a one-time publication on Voltaire's ideas entitled Voltaire, Man of Freedom. Voltaire once wrote, "Faith consists in believing when it is beyond the power of reason to believe. Faith consists in believing when it is beyond the power of reason to believe." Nasser and the Free Officers movement used the thirst for sovereignty and real independence Egyptians had in the 50s to construct a social political environment where the average citizen could believe even when it was beyond the power of reason to believe. To accomplish this, edification became a major concern. Edification is a term that is rarely used in contemporary intellectual debate. A quick dictionary search today will tell you that edification means to instruct, especially so as to encourage intellectual, moral, or spiritual improvement, that it denotes an uplifting enlightenment that results in understanding and the spread of knowledge. In the 18th century, edification began to place itself at the crossroads of the epistemological and ontological thinking that was constructing the intellectual pillars of modernism in Europe. What edification seems to describe from that time onwards is the struggle between the individual's autonomy as a self with a will and her existence within and contribution to a larger community. This is the beginning of edification's interest in aesthetics, since aesthetics is a domain that is intrinsically connected to the idea of representation. And to think of a balance between the autonomy of the individual's will and the individual's functioning within a community, one must begin to think of representation. An excess of patriotic songs, nationalistic ideas, populating textbooks, directed to translation, official TV, official museums, all indirectly, subtly, or overtly stating Masr for el-Jamia. Egypt is above everyone. But I think what we are witnessing today is edification being laid bare, made naked. That what constitutes us as human beings is formed, at least in part, by the sum of edification processes we have been through. This is exactly why the rebellious demand things but actually have no ready alternatives for the systems they want to replace. If 1989 was the year when ideologies fell to the market, 2011 was the year when the market began to fall to reveal edification. What is being suggested by the proliferation of protests and their systematic suppression is no less than a need for reconfiguring the lines that have drawn out the boundaries between the individual's autonomy as a self with a will and between her existence within the contribution to a larger community. If commodities delayed the implosion of the need for this reconfiguration for the large part of the last 20 years or so, commodities cannot act as sedatives for much longer. The bankruptcy of today is one of thought that can think out loud the problems of edification, that has shaped us so far, and think out loud what kind of edification, if at all needed, should be developed from now on. No government can adequately respond to such a grandiose underlying demand. The unspoken of demand, which is a new edification that can redraw the boundaries of the individual self and the fraternity of various societies, is something that will take time and shape itself in both bottom-up and top-down ways. Political movements are not only putting pressure on governments, but indirectly putting pressure on their societies and themselves until this new edification begins to formulate. Thank you very much.